It's hard to execute correctly because you have this narrow bandwidth and you have to know how to use that bandwidth super well only at certain times, because otherwise you're going to have the same stimulus over and over and over and over again, and it's going to lose its impact.
All right, almost Dr. Castro. As I know today, when you're creating haptic experiences, you actually have to create a separate haptic channel. So you create your kind of sound environment, let's say in a video game, and then you're creating a haptic channel, which is just creating different effects throughout that video game, and they're getting triggered at different points. Why is there a haptic channel, and why can't that all just be in that sound design from the get-go?
That's a good question. Yeah, it seems like, hey, if I want to, step on gravel, shouldn't that sound design of gravel yield that same reflection if you play it in the haptic channel? Yeah. Short answer, no, because that gravel texture is a very complex texture, and that's going to have multiple different things. Not all the stones are the same size hitting each other, and even if you record it, it's going to play back the signal that your brain will interpret as sound as gravel, but it's different from hearing it that when you actually step into it. There's a level of depth and perception there. So unless you can basically have the ability to recreate back to your sense of touch all those different nuances of detail of each gravel stone hitting against each other, then it's not going to feel the same way as it sounds. And that's obviously been the case of haptics. In the case of having one little oscillator go back and forth to try to recreate all those sounds at the same time, it's really difficult to keep it efficient and to be optimized over certain frequency bands to recreate the dexterity of a complex signal like that. Completely lost the train of thought.
So let's pull that back then. How is sound design and haptic channel, why is it still separate?
Yep. So let's put it this way. When you're creating that sound again, you have no idea that the haptic will be able to correctly execute that sound, that program, right? So in order to optimize for the little bit of room that you have to play with, right? Say in the PlayStation 5 controller, it's something that's a huge feature that if used correctly can make it seem super realistic, but if done incorrectly, it can definitely pull you out of the game and make it feel like there's just something happening to my controller, right? So, it's hard to execute correctly because you have this narrow bandwidth and you have to know how to use that bandwidth super well only at certain times, because otherwise you're gonna have the same stimulus over and over and over and over again, and it's gonna lose its impact. So there has to be a separate haptic channel, because audio rate runs at audio rate the entire time. The audio is always happening in a game. And if you have the same bzz, 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 bzz happening all the time, just like audio is happening, then it's gonna lose all sense and meaning to you, and it's just gonna be something that's just an annoyance that you have to deal with, right? So to learn how to sculpt and use it effectively means that you have to use without, which means you have to have a separate track that is mostly empty unless something's happening. That's specifically around that one thing. However, if you have something that is creating those vibrations to begin with, then you can leverage certain vibrations and how the body perceives vibration across different frequencies to your advantage, and say, I can take sound away overall and just have it be auditory. And then when I want something to start becoming more and more gradually felt, then I can actually just lower the frequency into the place that the body naturally feels more of those vibrations, which is ironically what the world is, right? The more that the storm comes to pass, the more you feel thunder, and the more you feel the lightning, and the more you feel this heaviness and weight come about it. So it is a super easy way that if you leverage audio rate for haptics, you can make this one-to-one, but it has to still be very carefully curated in order to make sure it's not overwhelming. But also, you need to have the technology to be able to reproduce a one-to-one sound of every frequency to begin with.
So what you're saying is today, the reason why this haptic channel exists is because of one, existing hardware out there and the reproduction tools to enjoy that. And then also, since with this narrow bandwidth, it's just easier for creators to create because you don't have to really pay attention so much to the nuances. It limits the experiences, but it's an easier development cycle. But if it was within one sound design tool and you had the hardware in the market to reproduce for that, you can now start leveraging them both in the same sound file and start creating super hyper realistic experiences, because you're now combining where that kind of auditory sense to your physical sense is kind of overlaying within the environment in real time.
And the other thing too is that there are not very many haptic audio editing softwares, but there's a ton of classes and there's a ton of resources for audio editing. Digital audio editing is something that you learn at school, that you can learn at community college, that you can pick up at any moment. And then if you have something that recreates audio from the entire spectrum so that it interacts with the body, then it's super easy to go and start exploring today with what you can do and start engaging with the body. But as far as haptics, you have to have a special development kit, some special software to be able to access that development kit, and then also have something to at least start developing for, to even begin to start experimenting with it. So I think there's a huge leg up in as far as access and ease of use and starting to develop and then to master that development. I think can happen much faster.
So over time, by going this approach that we're talking about, combining it all into one tool and leveraging tools and hardware in the market to be able to reproduce it, we're also reducing the barrier of creators to be able to create.
And what they can create.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Can't wait for that future.